The Dignity of the Soul, aka a sociological approach to mental health stigmatization. Hi, this is dedicated for my friends and for my English students. Uh, I would like to give you a bit information about this rather controversial and in many aspects sad subject. The reason I think it's sad and it's a bit depressing because stigmatization, whether it be a mental health stigmatization, is still apparent and still present in our society, which I found to be very sad and very distressing in many ways. I have to emphasize the fact that I am not a psychologist and I am not a sociologist either. But I've read many books based on this subject, and when preparing for this essay, well, to tell you the truth, I've been reading about this stuff, about this subject, for over 2 years because I am very interested in this subject, and I'm not trying to be conceited, but I also made a film with a friend of mine, a psychologist friend of mine, and the title of the film was The Dignity of the Soul, aka Notes about Mental Health Stigmatization. So that is why I have chosen the same title for this essay, and I would like to give great thanks to this friend of mine. She's a very good and very acclaimed psychologist, and I hope she will enjoy this little essay of mine, even if I have to emphasize that I can only give some hints because and on a elementary on about the subject on an elementary or maybe intermediate level, but I have striven on reading many books and many theses on this subject. So to cut a long story short, I would like to start my reading you this essay to have this discussed on our next lesson. So first of all, stigma is an attribute that conveys certain stereotypes. I read a book by Irving Goffman, a very famous theorist and a sociologist, who classically defined stigma, quote, an attribute that is deeply discrediting. This discredited attribute could be readily discernible, such as one's skin color or body size, or could be hidden but nonetheless discreditable if revealed, such as one's criminal record or in this case, the main subject of my essay, a person struggling with mental illness. For Goffman, based on the book I've read from Goffman, stigma is a general aspect of social life that complicates everyday micro-level interactions. The stigmatized person may be wary of engaging with those who do not share their stigma, and those without a certain stigma may disparage, overcompensate for or attempt to ignore stigmatized individuals. So the sad factor that can be found in this classic book concerning this subject is that stigmatized individuals are sort of ignored by society, or to be a bit extreme, they are excluded from society by having a mental illness, or by having another skin color, or having other deficits. It can be a physical deficit as well. If you think about somebody living in a wheelchair, or think about somebody who is deaf or dumb, these stigmatized individuals are sort of an outcasts to this day, in my opinion. And people, that a strangest part is that people fear them, as if something was very frightening about them. But I hope reading by continuing this essay, you will disagree with this thought that is very present today. in our society. So the ignoration I mentioned, most people, Goffman argued, experience the role of being stigmatized, quote, I'm quoting Goffman right now, at least in some connections and some phases of life. Indeed, Goffman's broad definition of stigma incorporates many contemporary discredited attributes, including what he defined as tribal stigmas. Now, I would like to give a few examples of stigmatization and stereotypes. Well, it can be race, ethnicity, and religion, and of course, mental illness, and physical deformities, deafness, blindness, and leprosy. And of course, there is a more radical way of people being excluded from society, and this is homosexual people, people living with substance abuse disorder, and the main subject, people with mental illness. In the decades following Goffman's articulation of stigma, psychologists, based on my knowledge, elaborated stigma's cognitive dimensions and process through which it shapes micro-level social interaction. So social interaction is very limited for people being stigmatized. Most of this research focused on stigmas understood to be related to characters such as addiction, mental illness, or stigmas stereotyped as deviant, such as homosexuality. I have to emphasize that the time when Goffman wrote this book, I have read, homosexuality was considered to be an illness. So now we all know that this is not true, and I completely disagree with this. Psychologists, people who really know this subject, have explored the evolutionary causes of stigma, with some suggesting that stigma serves social biological functions by characterizing, excluding individuals who may threaten a community through the spread of disease or perceived social disorder. End quote. I was quoting from Goffman. In addition, social psychologists has focused on the individual level consequences and coping responses of those who face stigma in daily interactions. To give you an example would be a person, if you want to be in the realm of mental illness, take a person with social anxiety disorder. He faces this stigma every day of his life. And I also have to emphasize that social anxiety disorder, for example, if you want to give an example of mental illness, is not just shyness, it's a illness. It's an illness that can be treated by medication very well. Well, this research I have come upon when reading of this subject documented that stigmatization's negative implications for self-esteem, academic achievement, mental health, and physical well-being. So all these very important factors of life, like self-esteem, academic achievement, mental health, and physical well-being, can be torn apart, so to speak, figure of speech, if the person is severely stigmatized. Another research on coping has documented how stigmatized individuals, persons living with major depression, for example, manage their stigmatized identities and cope with the specific instances of discrimination that they attribute to their stigma. So it's a kind of reverse stigma, in my opinion. And the literature is a subset of larger psychological literature concerned with individual coping responses to stress more broadly. Now, as I have read, avoidance, suppression, and identity development have identified these responses inconsistent moderating effect on stress. So to be a bit punctual and a bit understandable, the people who are being stigmatized use these techniques like avoidance, suppression, and identity development is severely deformed because society transforms them into believing that they are something of very endangerment to society, which is not true. So the psychological approach stated that the stigmatized person starts to believe his own illness, or may it be any kind of illness, to be this wrong. I have to emphasize the word wrong projections made by the society around them, her or him. And it can lead to self-destruction, suicide, and of course substance abuse disorder, because the person is now trapped in a kind of cage because of society. So society that judges this person becomes a kind of victim. I have to tell this word, victim of society. Now, as I already mentioned, that Goffman, the book I read by Goffman, is very, maybe it's anachronistic nowadays, because it deals with homosexuality, for example, as an illness. But I read more recent studies, and research on stigma in sociology has been less coherent than its counterpart in psychology. So psychology, I think, is more valid or more responsible for studying this subject. But of course, sociology is an important science as well. But the sociologists relied on the concept when it helped to illuminate a social phenomenon, but very rarely did researchers to strive to accumulate theoretical knowledge around stigma and fundamental social process. So that is mainly for psychologists to do when they are studying this and researching this subject. Now, the more recent studies, Link and Fallon, in a 2001 review of stigma in the annual review of sociology, initiated a kind of distinctively sociological approach to the study of stigma that since has been refined and elaborated. They made many points why Goffman's book is a little bit anachronistic, but still given credit for many interesting and valid thoughts on the book of Goffman and the work of Goffman. And the main focus of Link and Fallon's review of the book, Annual Review of Sociology, it became a kind of consideration how stigma related to the fundamental sociological questions, namely those relating to the social creation, reproduction, and the consequences of social inequalities. Sociological approaches to stigma in ensuing 15 years have considered the different types of, as well as meso and macro level causes, consequences, and responses to stigma. With respect to this type of stigma, sociologists have focused not only the stigmas related to the character. I already mentioned this kind of cage phenomenon when being stigmatized, and the person, the victim who is stigmatized, starts to identify with this wrong projection made by society. And the sociological approach, with a much greater emphasis than psychologists, stigmas, in their opinion, stigmas related to heritable bond of social categories such as race and ethnicity. And race and ethnicity, like a black person or a gypsy person, can be a victim of stigmatization, and these stigmas are related less to deviance and the violation of social norms, and more so to processes of exploitation and domination. This was a quote by Fallon Lincoln, the video in a publication made and written in 2008. Contemporary writers I just mentioned continues to draw inspiration from Goffman's core insights on the phenomenon. I really enjoy the book, Goffman's book, even if it considers homosexuality to be a deviance. I disagree with this. And developing measures, these current studies are developing measures to understand how different dimensions of stigma, such as curiosity stigma, structural stigma, and internalized stigma, shape inequalities faced by different groups and their social relations. Future research on stigma could benefit from greater comparison across stigmatized groups. Goffman articulated stigma as a general social process, focusing on how stigmatized individuals often face similar constraints in the management of social interactions, regardless of the particular type of stigma they face. So it really doesn't matter what kind of stigma you are being stigmatized with. This wrong negative projection made by the people around the person are still existent. So a gypsy person or a black person, if you are talking about ethnic stigmatization, or if you are talking about mental health, a depressed person, a bipolar or a substance abuse disorder, people suffering from a substance abuse disorder are equally stigmatized by society. And there are many in the essay of mine, the intervention. I will, as a conclusion, what is the intervention to help these people? So what can psychologists and the sociological approach help to help these people? How can it help them? Well, after Goffman, the contemporary scientists distinguished three levels of stigmatization. The first is micro level, the second is meso level, and the third one is macro level. The micro level is psychology, the meso level is social psychology and cultural sociology, and the third one is strictly just sociology. And I would like to talk about this categories, these three categories. So the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. Well, the causes. Now I would like to talk about the causes. Physical and mental disorders. I'm just getting a few examples. Social, biological, and instrumental motivations. It goes without saying that there are intersubjective and symbolic motivations, cultural motivations, and stereotypes apparent, what I have priorly mentioned, like physical and mental disorders. On the macro level, which is the third category, social closure, power, institutional practices, neighborhood and social segregation, and discriminatory laws. Now you can see that the macro level of this category published by the scientists is strictly based on a sociological analysis and not psychological analysis. So segregation, discriminatory laws. Now the consequences in psychology. Well, of course, the main starting point is a mental illness, stress, or it can be a physical illness as well. And on the meso level, which is dealing with both psychology and cultural sociology, self-esteem is decreased, identity is symbolic worse, interpersonal recognition is also decreased by a result of being stigmatized. And on the macro level, the third category, group disparities in mental and physical health in our group membership, economic and social inequality. So relating, in the aspect of sociology, um, well, it comes into conclusion that there is an inequality present for the negative impacts like self-esteem, identity loss, and the loss of symbolic worth. So these three categories may be, in conclusion of my essay, of my, sorry for a bit incoherent, may help to give a perspective on how this very important and very, very sad and distressing partial of our society, because it's part of our society, stigmatization. And in conclusion, I would like to say that you don't have the right to judge the people living with mental health issues, or living with a physical deformity, or living with ethnical differences, racial differences. I think if you try to reach out for these people, try to overlook the so-called shames that and stigmas that are related, because at the end of the day, it causes many pain and suffering for the victim. I have to tell you the word victim, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the essay, the person who gets stigmatized starts to believe his own illness, may it be any kind of illness, to be a deviancy. And the book I read, Goffman clearly states, and of course these three categories of current contemporary writers stated that if we don't stop stigmatizing people living with any kind of deficits, then the person believes it to be a deviance. And just imagine if a person believing it to be a deviance, his own illness, may it be sexual difference, racial difference, and mental health problems, could cause a very sad and miserable life. And of course, it can lead to depression and many other very destructive roads for the person, for the victim, I have to tell you. So I hope you enjoy this essay. I am no psychologist and no sociologist, but I found it to be really interesting to read about this subject. I will talk about this when preparing for the exams, for your exams, guys. Have a nice morning. Bye.